good to be with you tonight. We have several with us, and I think we have a few visitors. So thank you for being here with us. Maybe you're here just to see family again, but we're happy that you decided to choose and worship with us tonight. What I'd like to do with you tonight, and I don't think this will take very long, but I want to just do another Bible word study. And every once in a while, a couple of weeks, I haven't done one in a while, and just pick a word and basically just try to define the word using the context that we found in the scriptures. And so I like doing that every once in a while, and I decided to go after this one, hospitality. Every time I hear this word, I go back to being 18 years old, sitting in a Bible classroom with a Bible class teacher I really admired and loved and thought a lot of. But he just had this brain hiccup one day when he was trying to cover this word. And so I remember sitting there in the classroom, and the teacher goes, "Well, what does hospitality mean?" And before anyone can answer, he goes, "Well, wait, let's just break up the word in half. Hospital, first word. What does hospital mean?" And somebody goes, "It's somewhere where you go when you're sick." "Yeah, that's correct." And he goes, "Second word, towel." Moving on. And he just completely skipped it, just kept on going. I've done things like that too. But every time I see that word, that's the first thing I think about is, the word hospital is in there, and you can't really break it in half because I'm not really sure what the word ality is. But we're just going to look at the passages that have to do with that. We're going to define it secondly. At the end, what I'd like to do is build up to the passage in Hebrews 13:2. I think we can make a very powerful point in Hebrews 13:2 if we'll define the word first. And at the end, I just have two motivations that God gives us to be more hospitable to other people. Let's first just look at the only 5 passages in the entire Bible where the word hospitality is used. We can make a powerful argument that hospitality is all through the Bible. Christianity depended on hospitality. If you remembered when Jesus sends out the 70, there was the command there that you're going to live off the hospitality of others. You're going to go with no food, with no money, with not an extra pair of shoes, and you're just going to depend on those that take you in and take care of you. Christianity was dependent on hospitality. We could have gone through Acts and shown all the times when Paul or Peter stayed at somebody else's house because the Christianity depended on hospitality. This is the way that we're going to work. And you think about the way that we even convert people today. We have those people into our homes. We feed them. We have them over extended periods if they need a place to stay. Christianity depends on hospitality. And being that we understand that in examples, the word's only used 5 times in the Bible and only 4 times in the New King James. The first 2 are in the qualifications for elders. 1 Timothy 3:2, a bishop must be blameless, the husband of one wife, temperate, sober-minded, of good behavior, hospitable, able to teach. The other one, of course, Titus 1:8, but hospitable, a lover of what is good, sober-minded, just, holy, self-controlled. Both of them are in both lists of elder qualifications. The other 3 actually give context, and we'll be talking about these. 1 Peter 4:9, be hospitable to one another without complaint. The other 2 is actually the word hospitality. Romans 12:13, distributing to the needs of saints, given to hospitality. And of course, Hebrews 13:2, and I'm reading out the New American Standard Version tonight. Do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers, for by this some have entertained angels without knowing it. The New King James and the King James Version, when they get that word hospitality in Hebrews 13:2, they use the word entertain. They don't use the word hospitable or hospitality. And I think there's a reason for that, and we're going to get to that at the very end of this sermon. But if you're reading the New King James, your word there is entertain, not hospitality. Just something to make note here is that these first 3 are adjectives, if I'm correct. And the second 2 are adverbs. They describe the verb, not the noun they're representing. And I think that may have had something to do with the difference we're about to see when we trace the word's heritage. In the classic Benny Williams fashion, let's define the word. This word has been transformed over several large amounts of years to the word we have hospitality to get today. The word Webster's just says generous or cordial reception of guests. That's what hospitality means. But Webster's will tell you where the word originated from. Hospitality is not a Greek word. It's a Latin word. And the word had its origin from this Latin root hospice, which the definition of that is host, guest, or stranger. And I think the thought there was that you could use the word in Latin, hospice, to describe a host, a guest, or a stranger, anyone that was part of that experience, right? I would be the host, you would be the guest or the stranger, and that word for either of us or the whole thing would have been hospice. I kind of gave it away, but what other words are derived from this word hospice? Well, obviously hospital, right? A place you go where you're sick. And of course, we know about the organization hospice, right? And all the great things that they do. Very, really fitting this Latin word. Well, hospice, the Latin word, wasn't the original word either. There was another Latin word that's older that was used first. And that was this word hostis, or hostis, depending on the way you want to pronounce it, which only meant stranger or enemy. That was the way it was used. It was used to describe a stranger or an enemy. Well, what words were derived from that? Well, words like host, hotel, and this word, hostile. Someone's hostile to you, that comes from this word hostis, right? An enemy, a stranger. Already you can see here, there was something kind of lost as the word got passed down. There was a stranger aspect to this word that kind of got lost over time. And it was still here. It was like, all right, it was a stranger or an enemy. Then it turns to a host or a guest. And by the time we get to English, it now just is talking about a reception of guests. Do you see how stranger was lost in the definitions? You go all the way back to the Greek, and there's actually 2 Greek words in the Bible that get translated to hospitable. You first have the word philoxenos, which means, as Strong says, generous to guests. You see that in 1 Timothy 3:2, Titus 1:8, the elder qualifications, and you see that in 1 Peter 4:9. Now, if you think about this for a second, the aspect of being generous to guests, isn't that very broad? You know, any time you show generosity to a guest, to a visitor, that would be hospitable in the way that word philoxenos is used. That means I can know who you are, you can know me, we could be brothers. And not just brothers in Christ, but actually biological brothers. And you could be my guest in my house, and I would show that kindness to you. And philoxenos would work with that definition. There's another way that the word is translated into hospitality, though. And that's this word, philoxeneia. A little different. And the way Strong's defines that one is with the strangers. Love to strangers. And that's used in Romans 12:13 and Hebrews 13:2. Now, the first time I saw this, I was like, okay, well, I understand the difference. One's an adjective, one's an adverb. That must be why. But when the more and more I looked at it, that just wasn't the case. There was that root word, the phileo, the love is in there, right? But there always, in almost every dictionary of Koine Greek that I could find, they made a distinction between these 2 words. One, philoxenos, was generous to guest, which was broad, and one was very specific, philoxeneia, which was love to strangers. And again, I think by the time we get to the English word hospitality, we've forgotten the stranger part. We removed it. And now we're not exactly sure how we've gotten here to the point we're at. Well, let's look at these 3 passages. We can't really use the elder qualifications because there's no context. Let's look at 1 Peter 4:9 and Romans 12:13 and Hebrews 13:2 and see if these definitions fit that context in the passages. 1 Peter 4:9 would have been that philoxenos, generous to guests. Let's read that passage. 1 Peter 4, Peter telling us how we need to handle persecution. Let's start in verse 7. 1 Peter 4:7. The end of all things is at hand. Therefore be of sound judgment and sober spirit for the purpose of prayer. Above all, keep fervent in your love for one another, because love covers a multitude of sins. Be hospitable to one another without complaint, for each one has received a special gift. Employ it in serving one another as good stewards of the manifold grace of God. Whoever speaks, let him speak as it were the utterance of God. Whoever serves, let him do it by the strength which God supplies, so that in all things God may be glorified through Jesus Christ, to whom belongs the glory and dominion forever and ever. Amen. When we look at the context here all the way back in verse 1, and hopefully remember the Peter study we did out here recently. Remember what this chapter is about. The chapter is about persecution. Verse 1 says, the Lord suffered, and he ceased our lives from sin. If you cease your life from sin, you're going to suffer too. And then he gives the example of suffering that you're not going to fit in with the world anymore, and the world's going to make fun of you and ridicule you because you don't fit in anymore. Now Peter explaining with this extreme persecution that's happening to you become a Christian, what are you going to do? Well, that's verse 7. In verse 7, this is the solution to handle persecution. You need to keep a sober mind, and you're going to need to pray. In verse 7. That's the way you're going to handle persecution. You're also going to love one another. And you're going to take care of one another because love covers a multitude of sins. You get to verse 9, you're going to need to be hospitable to one another. You're going to need to be generous to one another without complaint or grumbling. New King James used the word grumbling. I've said this way too many times. But why do I like the word grumble? Because it is what it sounds like. You grumble about it. Grumble, 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 right? That you're going to take care of each other when each other are guests, and you're not going to complain or grumble about it. You're going to be happy about it. You have an opportunity to just serve one another, which went into verse 10 and verse 11. Why do we have the ability to serve and take care of one another? Because God gave us that ability, right? If we have the ability to have guests in our home, why can we do that? Because God gave us that ability. If we're able to come up here and speak and teach, if we're able to go to our neighbor and share them the word of God, how are we able to do that? Because God gave us that ability to do that. So if we're going to do any of these abilities, Peter says, let's do them for one another and to glorify Jesus Christ and his Father. And so how are we going to be able to be hospitable and generous to our guests? Because God gave us that. And we're going to use that for one another, and we're going to use that to glorify God. It's just two questions from this. In a time of great persecution, like we see here discussed in chapter 4, can brethren suddenly become your house guests? Because that's what's said there, right? Be hospitable to one another. I would assume that's brethren. Be hospitable to one another without grumbling. Well, in a time of great persecution, that's probably the time you're going to have the most house guests. Somebody comes, knocks on your door. You know, the soldiers came. They kicked us out of our house. We're on the run. We need a place to spend the night. Is that not what's going to happen in a time of great persecution? And all of a sudden, now you have all these guests that used to be, or that still are your brethren. They're your house guests now. I think that fits the context perfectly. Look at this second question. In a time of great trial, can brethren suddenly become in need of your generosity? They don't have anything to eat. Well, what do? They come to you. I don't have anything to eat. Well, now we have the opportunity to be hospitable. And hospitality is going to be one of the ways that we're going to survive persecution, is because we're going to take care of each other. What about that last part, with no complaint or grumbling? Will we have times in our lives when brethren become our house guests because something is going on, and they'll give us something to complain or grumble about? Andrew, drink all the milk. Where are all the eggs? You took your boots and you didn't wash them off. You didn't take your boots off. You just came in and you trucked mud through the carpet. There's going to be times when we have the opportunity to be hospitable to guests, and they're going to give us something to complain about. But what does Peter say? No complaints, no grumbling, you serve the Lord. He doesn't even give us a reason why not to complain. He just says, no, you don't do that, because you're going to be hospitable in this way. That's 1 Peter 4:9. That generous to guests is the definition given there. Let's look at Romans 12 now. Romans 12:13. Here in the list of the attributes Paul gives that's expected out of the Christian, this being that living sacrifice, this is one of the things he gives in 12:13, contributing to the needs of the saints, practicing hospitality. And here in Romans 12:13 is the philoxeneia, the lover of strangers, or love to strangers. It says contributing to the needs of saints or practicing hospitality there. And I don't think we have to read much either. You know, it's under that banner, let love be without hypocrisy. This is one of the ways we show that. Well, here in Romans, does the context have the stranger aspect to it? I think it does. Look at Romans chapter 15. Romans 15:22. This is how Paul kind of wraps up the end of the book and tells them about what's going on and what his plans are. Romans 15:22. For this reason I have found often being hindered from coming to you. But now with no further space or no further place for me in these regions, and since I have for many years longing to come to you, whenever I go to Spain, for I hope to see you in passing, and to be helped on my way there by you, when I have first enjoyed your company for a while. But now I'm going to Jerusalem serving the saints, For Macedonia and Achaia have been pleased to make contribution for the poor among the saints in Jerusalem. Yes, they were pleased to do so, and that they were indebted to them. For if the Gentiles had shared in their spiritual things, they are indebted to the minister to them also in material things. Therefore, when I have finished this, I will put my seal on this fruit of theirs, and I will go on by way of you to Spain. We can keep on reading, but I just need to stop there. Romans 15, 22, 29, do you see a stranger aspect to this type of hospitality? I see two. The first one is, I'm going backwards here. The Romans were told about the work of the Macedonians and those in Achaia giving to the needy saints in Jerusalem. Does that tie back to something in Romans 12, 13? It's actually the phrase, if you look up there, that's right beside hospitality. You know, contributing to the needs of the saints, being hospitable. I think Paul's saying these are cousins here, and we see how they're cousins here in Romans 15. Here are Gentiles that have probably never met these Christians in Jerusalem, these saints in Jerusalem, and yet they're giving of their means to take care of them. Well, what is that? That's a love for strangers, isn't it? That's in Romans 12, 13. Where's the other stranger in Romans 15 that they're going to show love to? It's the Apostle Paul himself, right? And we see that in verse 22. I, for a long time, wanted to come to you, but I haven't been able to. Romans 1:13 gives the same thought. He knew of these people. He may have known a few select ones. He certainly knew them through Aquila and Priscilla, who used to be Romans and had moved and lived closer to him. But Paul had never actually met these people face to face. And what is Paul expecting? On my way to Spain, I expect to stay with you for you to help me along the way. And after I've gotten to meet you and spend time with you, then I'll move on to Spain. One of the strangers that they're commanded to show love to is Paul himself. Do you see the love to stranger, the stranger part here in Romans 12 and Romans 15? I certainly see it. Let's look now at Hebrews 13. Hebrews 13. And now we really, at least for me, I really get to dig into this. This has basically been like a whole thing just so I can explain Hebrews 13. Let's just read it first. Hebrews 13, verse 1. The writer having his closing thoughts. These are all kind of sporadic. They don't really all connect. But there's a lot of powerful points he makes here in Hebrews 13. Hebrews 13, verse 1. Let love of the brethren continue. Do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers, for by this some have entertained angels without knowing it. Remember the prisoners as though in prison with them, and those who are ill-treated, since you yourselves are also in the body. And I think there's something significant here in verse 3 that after he says to show hospitality, he says, remember your brethren in prison. Because even though they're in prison, they are still part of the body. Whose body is that? That's the Lord's body. That's the church. So there's a message here that, hey, there's an expectation we show hospitality to strangers. I have heard this before, that hospitality was love to strangers. That's probably because I've talked to Darren about this a lot. And if you've talked to Darren about this, you know Darren's a sailor about this. He brings this up, that hospitality is a love to strangers. So I've had opportunities to talk to people about this. And I would bring it up too, that there's, a love to strangers aspect of hospitality. Don't take away the stranger aspect of hospitality. What my fear is that sometimes we like to have people over, which is a good thing. And we like to take care of one another, which is a good thing. But we only have people over, and we only take care of people that we know. There is no stranger aspect to our hospitality, which I believe is a problem. So I think that fits in. It's a good thing when we take care of one another that we know. I think that fits in perfectly into 1 Peter 4:9. It obviously does not fit into Hebrews 13:2. Because what's specified there? Do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers. So there's something specific brought up here. Show hospitality to strangers. Well, I brought this up one time. My father-in-law gave me this little nugget. He said, well, Andrew, if the definition is love to strangers, then why does he say it twice? Because this is how it would read if that's the definition, if we just wrote out the definition in the sentence. Do not neglect to show love to strangers, for by this some have entertained angels without knowing it. Let me just suggest to you this. This is the reason why of the redundancy here. Do not neglect to show love to strangers, I think the redundancy is on purpose. That's what I think now. I've been thinking about this for a while. I think the redundancy is on purpose. He uses a word, philoxeneia, which means love to strangers. He says, don't forget to show love to strangers, especially to strangers. Because that's what he's talking about, right? That's the subject of the sentence, the stranger aspect of hospitality. I think this is kind of what it's here. Be sure to show love to your friends, but be especially sure to show love to strangers. That's supposed to be a huge part of this. Does that remind you of something else in the Bible? Be sure to love your friends, but be especially sure to love strangers. What if we change that stranger word to the other meaning of that word hostis in Latin? What if we said, be sure to love your friends, but be especially sure to show love to your enemies? Do you remember that? Turn to Luke chapter 6. Luke chapter 6. Jesus making a point again about the importance of showing love, not just to your friends, but he takes it a step further from strangers. He says to your enemies. Luke chapter 6, verse 32. And if you love those who love you, what credit is that to you? For even sinners love those who love them. And if you do good to those who do good to you, what credit is that to you? For even sinners do the same thing. And if you lend to those from whom you expect to receive, what credit is that to you? Even sinners lend to sinners in order to receive back the same amount. But love your enemies and do good and lend, expecting nothing in return, and your reward will be great. And you will be sons of the Most High, and he himself is kind and ungrateful and evil men. Jesus' point is what we're talking about in Hebrews 13 too. You know, what credit is it to you? What good is it for you if you love those who love you? Even sinners do that. That's easy, right? And imagine this situation. People are coming in and out of the building all the time. And usually we do have visitors, especially on Sunday morning. How do you greet those visitors that you know versus you greet those visitors that you don't know? James Tackett's been coming back a lot. We see Tackett, we know Tackett. He used to be a member here. We go and we go greet him, right? We go and talk to him. We're excited to see him. We ask how things have been. We sit there and we try to, make sure we can keep this friendship going, right? Well, why do we love Tackett so much? There's probably a lot of noble reasons we could give, but let me give this one. We love Tackett because Tackett loves us. We know Tackett. He's not a stranger. And yet when that stranger walks in the building, someone we don't know, they may be a brother, they may be a sister, we don't know. When they walk into the building, we might give them a handshake. We might. Do we cater more to those that we know? Are we all really good at 1 Peter 4:9? But we are terrible at Hebrews 13:2. And yet, because in English, hospitality is used to describe both things, we go, oh yeah, I'm hospitable. Check mark. I'm really hospitable to my friends. But these people that I don't know, don't worry, I'm not going to worry about that. I'll be a 1 Peter 4:9 hospitality. I'm not going to be a Hebrews 13 hospitality. I think we've let ourselves do that. And we've completely destroyed the stranger aspect so we can be more comfortable in our own skin. Let me ask this question. Is it possible for brethren to be strangers? I think the answer is very obvious. But let's turn to the book of 3 John. 3 John, look at what the Apostle John praises Gaius about. 3 John, verse 5. I'll wait till everybody gets there. So I stop hearing the pages turning. So it's just one little sentence. but it fits perfectly into what we're talking about. Verse 5, beloved, you are acting faithfully in whatever you accomplish for the brethren, and especially when they are strangers. Beloved, you are acting faithfully to the brethren, especially when they are strangers. That there's an expectation here that as Christians, we would show love to people that we don't know, especially too when they're brethren, right? You have the opportunity that there are brethren around us that need, hospitality. They need help. We may not know who they are. And the Apostle John praises Gaius because, hey, you're taking care of these people. You know they're brethren, but you really don't know who they are. If the Apostle John can look down at Gaius and he can make that point, don't you think the Lord Jesus Christ does that all the time? Andrew, you were really good to this brother, and Andrew, you didn't know that brother. They were a stranger to you. Wouldn't that make him proud? Wouldn't that make him think we're doing Hebrews 13:2 hospitality? Especially here in Gardendale, do we have the opportunity to show hospitality to strangers that are brethren? I think we do all the time. And sometimes we're very good about it. You think about where we are here in Birmingham, people have to come to UAB because they're sick and something's going on. We should take those opportunities, especially when they're strangers, right? Right now, there's a young man that housing situation fell through. He needs a place to live for 6 months. We posted it on the Facebook members page. And there's actually somebody right now who's a brother in Christ, who's a stranger to us, that needs a place to stay for 6 months because his housing arrangement fell through. I don't know, may not all of us have that opportunity to take somebody in like that. And I understand there's a lot of logistics we talk about. But right there, right in front of you, is an opportunity to show Hebrews 13:2 hospitality. But what's the problem? Maybe for some of us in our minds, he's a stranger. If Jeff May walked up and said, I need a place to stay for 6 months, there would be a line of people trying to house Jeff May for 6 months. Why? Because he's not a stranger. And yet Hebrews 13:2, Romans 12:13, and here especially in 3 John 5, what is said specifically? You need to be finding opportunities to show love to strangers. That's Hebrews 13:2 hospitality. And yet we stay in our comfort zone and we only show love to those that we know, love to our guests that we know. One other thing, let me ask a second question. Is it possible that there are brethren in this room right now that are strangers to you? For me, there are. I'm going to be honest about it. There's no reason for me never to be honest about it. There's some of you that I know your name, but that's really it. You're a stranger. We're strangers to each other. I've never had you over. You've never had me over. There's only two people to blame. Me and you. It's our fault. Do we always have an opportunity to show Hebrews 13:2 hospitality? You will always have the opportunity to show Hebrews 13:2 hospitality until every single person that's a member of Gardendale Church of Christ is no longer a stranger to you. You will always have this opportunity. And what a goal to try to achieve, to try to show love to strangers to the point that they are no longer strangers. And then we get to abide in 1 Peter 4:9. We're just showing generosity to guests. Two motivations that let me leave you with. One of them is in Hebrews 13:2. Do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers or entertain. The reason why I said I think the New King James has a word entertain there is because they're trying to fix the redundancy. They get a different word that wouldn't be as redundant. For by this you have entertained angels without knowing it. That second part there is our motivation, number one. Some have entertained angels and they didn't even know that they were doing it. The classic example Michael read for us, Genesis 18. When Abraham and Sarah had 3 men into their house and killed a calf and fed them, and Abraham ran in and said to Sarah, make bread. Sarah had to stop what she was doing and do that. He says, show hospitality to strangers all the time. For all you know, you might be showing hospitality to an angel. And not that I know how God works in that way anymore, and not that I have any idea the way that angels walk among us. If they do, I don't really know. I don't really care to have an answer. But I do know this. Because of this passage, I should treat every stranger as if they're an angel from God. given me an opportunity to show love to strangers. Because the last thing I want is to stand before the Lord one day and he goes, Andrew, I even sent you an angel and you didn't even let him in your house. You didn't even feed him. You didn't do anything for him. You just turned the other way. I don't want that to happen to me. If you skip over everybody, you could eventually maybe skip over an angel. And I think that's the motivation, at least there in Hebrews 13:2. Let me give you a second motivation. This is my last passage. Leviticus 19 has a lot of great material on this. It is because Leviticus 19 is about justice. And this almost became a Leviticus sermon. But I decided just to pick one and let that be my second motivation. Leviticus 19:33, and if a stranger dwells with you in the land, and you shall not mistreat him. The stranger who dwells among you shall be to you as one of the born among you, and you shall love him as yourself, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. Similar built to Hebrews 13:2, there's the command and the motivation at the end. The command is when a stranger dwells among you, you love them. You treat them as if they're one of your own. The motivation is number 2, because you used to be strangers in the land of Egypt. And what a powerful motivation for us. Haven't we all been strangers before? And don't even think spiritually yet. Do you enjoy those times that you're with a gathering of people and you don't know anybody there? Do you enjoy that? You know, I've been in several situations. I think maybe a lot of us that are married or newlyweds, we kind of come into understanding with this. You'll go over to the other spouse's family house, and they'll be talking about things. You can't even participate in the conversation. You don't even know what they're talking about. Especially when you come to my house, we talk so fast. And it's nothing but inside jokes. Just back and back, you have no clue what we're talking about. You feel like you can't be a part of the conversation. Do you feel like a stranger? Do you like that? What about you go visit another congregation? You don't know anybody there. You're just traveling. You need a place to worship. You go there. I mean, do you enjoy not knowing anybody there? None of us like being strangers. Yet we've all been strangers before. What about the spiritual application? Have you been a stranger from God? And at the point that you realize you're a stranger from God, did you enjoy that? Does God show love to strangers? Absolutely he does. Is God hospitable in both ways? Absolutely he is. And actually his plan is for you to not be a stranger anymore, for him to welcome you to be part of his church, his body, and then one day he will show generosity to his guests when they come and live in his home in heaven. God is hospitable. And what's great about this is maybe in sometimes those social situations when we have no desire to be a stranger, it's just what we're stuck in. We just have to deal with it. We sit there quietly and we try to get in the conversation if we understand what's going on. We have no choice in the matter sometimes. What's best about this is actually you do have a choice in the matter. You don't have to be a stranger to God or God's people. He's opened that door wide open to be part of his family. If there's anyone here that would like to be part of God's family, please let us assist you in that. If that's salvation through the waters of baptism, or if that's the power of prayer that we can make sure you're in a right relationship with the Lord, why don't you come forward as we stand and sing? When Jesus